Welcome back, everyone. I hope you enjoyed that break. We are here with our third installment of Africa is the Holy Land for Hidden Revelations. So let's talk about where the real Holy Land is. Obviously, we've built up to this point. We talked about what a Holy Land is, the fact that the current Holy Land is in Africa. However, I did say in the previous video, I do not believe that the current place that we call the Holy Land is what is actually the Holy Land. Now, it's important to emphasize that this is not a new hypothesis. Many people have drawn this hypothesis, and I'm just building on top of what other people have already done. As such, I'm going to actually play a video where the research is so well done, I could not top it, and so I'm going to present this video to you, and of course, give commentary on it as we go. So let's get started and push play. By the way, when we finish this video, I'm actually going to give some scriptural references on top of those that are already given inside of the presentation, which I think will be very helpful to you. So let's go ahead and get started.
The geographical borders of the biblical land of Israel are laid down in three places in the Hebrew Bible: in Genesis, Exodus, and Numbers. These three books contain a relatively detailed description of the region in Africa where the Israelite culture and civilization was centered. The references found in these books are many times obscure and ambiguous, and difficult to discern because of the absolute nature of the place names that are used as reference.
That is a very important aspect of this entire understanding. And if you're going to research this topic, understand that too. We've been given names of different places that supposedly are inside of different places in Israel, the current state of Israel or Palestine. But if you actually look back at what the actual translations say, first of all, many of these places were given these names after the fact. After the fact, meaning like after colonization, after the dispersal of the Hebrew people, they were given names by people who are trying to align things with their understanding of the world. So we're going to talk about this one. They talk about this in this video. A big one that I was shocked to realize is that the name Euphrates that is given to the Euphrates River, if you actually research the name Parath, that river cannot be the river that's described in the Bible. And that, of course, completely changes the geography of where the Holy Land could be. So let's get started more into this, because this is going to be a frequent issue that you basically run into, is that biblical translators have applied their own locations to different names, and basically not actually did the proper research to know if this place was actually
But they still have preserved for us a rough picture of the borders of the region known in the Bible as the land of Israel. The first map is found in Genesis 15, in the passage where God describes to Abraham the area that would forever be inherited and occupied by his descendants.
In the same day the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, Unto thy seed have I given this land, from the river of Egypt unto the great river, the river Euphrates, the Kenites, and the Kenizzites, and the Cadmonites, and the Hittites, and the Perizzites, and the Rephaims, and the Amorites, and the Canaanites, and the Girgashites, and the Jebusites.
The area described in this passage.
Okay, this is worth emphasis. So the borders that were given to Abraham were from the Euphrates to all the way to the river of Egypt. I'm going to just show you a visual right now to help you understand. These were the borders that were given to Abraham. Now, of course, you probably noticed while looking at this, these borders don't match the current state of Israel. So what are people saying when they say this is the borders that the Lord, that Yah, gave to Abraham, yet these don't even match what we're looking at? So we're going to get more into that later on.
Passage includes a very large and vast region in East and Northeast Africa. It begins with the river of Egypt, which, as we will soon see, stretch as far north as the edges of the first cataract in the city of Aswan. The borders then continue south towards the Euphrates River in Ethiopia. Yes, the biblical Euphrates River, which is a separate topic in itself, a topic which we will cover in a separate episode, was not located in Iraq, but actually in Ethiopia. But until then, all that we need to remember
By the way, I did my own separate research apart from what he was saying. And at first, I did not think that the river that he identifies in this video was the Euphrates, but actually, just doing my own research and conclusions, I absolutely think that he's right about what the actual Euphrates is.
and they continue all the way down to Ethiopia. These borders are further elaborated by the next map. This map is complementary to the first map in Genesis. Unlike the Genesis map,
I'm actually going to pause right now because this is an important issue to understand. I don't know if you've noticed it, but he shows the sea of reeds and in parentheses. That's because what translator said was Red Sea is actually not Red Sea. It's actually Sea of Reeds, which is actually not the Red Sea. So this is like a deep issue. Like you're going to keep encountering when you're trying to really decipher scripture, is that some translator puts their own understanding or their own thinking of the region basically into the text, and it doesn't match what the actual word was saying. Okay, everyone, you could definitely watch the full video, but I'm going to jump forward a little bit just so you can kind of see all the maps that were pulled together and essentially what his references were.
this was the Qadim, or the eastern borders of the land of Israel. These four regions represent the borders of the biblical land of Israel, beginning with the first cataract in Egypt and stretching all the way down to central Ethiopia, and then from the Nile westward and going out at the Red Sea. This is the region that is known in the Bible as the land of Israel, the home of the Israelite culture of ancient East Africa. The Bible tells us that this entire region was once controlled by one Israelite king, King Solomon, during the golden age of ancient Israel, and that Solomon ruled from central Ethiopia all the way to the borders of Egypt.
And at that time Solomon held a feast, and all Israel with him, a great congregation from the entering in of Hamath unto the river of Egypt, before the Lord our God 7 days, and 7 days, even 14 days.
Archaeology has somewhat confirmed that there was a monolithic culture that occupied this area before the establishment of the Demot culture, and that this monolithic culture later became unified and known as the Demot civilization. Monroe Hayes quotes this discovery in his book Aksum, an African Civilization of Late Antiquity, with the recent studies showing that in the late 2nd or early 1st millennium BC, the eastern part of the Tigray Plateau was included in a widespread cultural complex on both the African and Arabian Tehama coasts of the Red Sea, in contact with the lowlands of Sudan, and perhaps with the Nile Valley, while the western part was in contact with the people of the Gash Delta. These two regions of the plateau later became unified culturally and politically under the Demot monarchy, meaning the biblical Israelite monarchy.
I actually want to go to some scripture to point out more specifically how we can know for sure that the land of Israel that has been described to us is absolutely not the one that we think is the land of Israel. So let's start with 1 Chronicles 18, 1 through 4. It says, "Now after this it came to pass that David smote the Philistines and subdued them. And he took Gath and her towns out of the hands of the Philistines. And he smote Moab, and the Moabites became David's servants and brought gifts. And David smote Hadad-Rezer, the king of Zobah, unto Hamath, as he went to establish his dominion by the river Euphrates." So look again at where the river Euphrates is. Very far from the state, either the state of Israel today or ancient Israel. But the scripture right here is telling you that David's dominion went all the way to the river Euphrates. You see this numerous times in scripture, showing that Euphrates was literally on Israel, was not a far distance from Israel. Let's go to another scriptural reference. 2 Chronicles 7, 8 through 10. It says, also at the same time, Solomon kept the feast 7 days. We were just talking about this, the scripture that he referenced in First Kings. And he says, all Israel was with him, a very great congregation from the entering of Hamath unto the river of Egypt. So I want you to understand what modern archaeologists who have this viewpoint of the state of Israel being Israel, they say that where it says the entrance of Hamath, it's talking about a city. So let me read from this description right here. This comes from Biblical Gateway. They said Hamath, once Hemath, and once in the Apocrypha, Amathus, fortification, city, or citadel. And it says it was built on both the banks of the Orontes River. The city was surrounded by hills and had a warm and humid climate. Every single time that you look up where is the modern day Hamath, they're going to give you this description of this city. Today, the city is actually called Hamath. The problem is that if you look at the biblical descriptions, it's not a city that they're talking about in the Bible. The Bible is not talking about a city, it's actually talking about an area or a country. So let's go back to the scripture and finish reading. It says, Solomon went to Hamath Zobah and prevailed against it. He built Tadmor in the wilderness and all the store cities, which he built in Hamath. So you see clearly in this scripture, it says he built cities in Hamath, meaning the current biblical archaeologists who tell us that Hamath is a city. How is he building a city in Hamath if Hamath is a city? Clearly, Hamath was not a city. It had to be a country or an area. It goes on to say he also built Beth Horon, the upper, Beth Horon, the nether, fenced cities with walls, gates, bars, and Belath, all the store cities that Solomon had, and all of the chariot cities, and the cities of the horsemen, and all that Solomon desired to build in Jerusalem and in Lebanon and throughout all of the land of his dominion. So not just one city, not two cities, many cities. Wherever this place that Hamath would be had many cities inside of it. Okay. So we go back to the first scripture I read, 1 Chronicles 18, 1 through 4. If you go to verse 3, it says, and David smote Hadad-ezer, king of Zobah, unto Hamath, as he went to establish his dominion by the river Euphrates. So Hamath has to be by the river Euphrates, meaning the river Euphrates has to actually be on the borders of Israel because Israel actually conquered Hamath. So this is just another showing that the Euphrates that we call the Euphrates today is not actually the Euphrates that existed in scripture. So that will wrap up this presentation for today. Do watch the full video from Biblical Revisionist. And in addition, he has so many videos that are very informative, very well laid out, evidence-based, gives a lot of credence towards his views. Ultimately, you're always encouraged, and definitely please just do it. Like, do your own research, do your own reading, go back and make sure that the scriptures that I cited actually match what they're supposed to, what I say them as saying, because that's very important that we not just take people's word for things, but that we actually take the time to do our own studies. Now, as far as next week, that is going to me be a very crucial point because we're going to talk about not just where the Holy Land is. We can see that it's in East Africa, but specifically what the scripture says, that the scriptures that were actually taken out of scripture, because the scripture doesn't just tell us where the Holy Land is, Shem's portion, but it also tells us where Eden is. And I'm sure many of you already know that Eden is in Africa. I've known that since I was a kid, right? But specifically where it is, I think has a lot to do with what you see is happening in geography. So we're going to go through the book of Jubilees next week. Jubilees, I believe, was literally removed from the biblical canon by the Catholic Church because it specifically identifies East Africa, like unequivocally. Tells you from the rivers, tells you where to go, tells you where to stop. It literally lays out East Africa as being where the actual Holy Land is, including Eden and also Israel. So if you want to know why there's a place in the Bible called Apocrypha where books are taken out, that's probably a big reason because it identifies things that you probably shouldn't know. We're going to go through those borders. We're going to go through the geography as laid out by the book of Jubilees. But for now, I hope that was informative for you. I hope to see you next week. And until then,